just came across. But this was fortunately and unfortunately a tragic mishap. Bones don't just put themselves in random barrels, so this was clearly a murder. Or should I say, murders. So completely shaken, the hunter scrambled out of the woods and raced to report his gruesome discovery to the authorities. And the small town of Allenstown was soon buzzing with the shocking news. Local law enforcement, led by the Allenstown Police Department, arrived at the scene soon after, cordoning off the area as investigators started to comb through the site, hoping that they'd find a clue that might lead them to the identities of the victims or the persons responsible for this extremely heinous act. But the bodies had been in those barrels for an extremely long time, years even, they assumed, given the fact that they were bones by the time that they found them. And they estimated the times of death between 1977 and 1985, which was the year the barrel was discovered. And with the bodies in the barrel was no personal belongings, so they basically had no clues to indicate who they were. So the initial investigation hit a wall almost immediately.
Having at that time 2 victims and just the manner in which they were killed, the blunt trauma side of it, it was very abnormal for New Hampshire.
And investigative capabilities were drastically different during these days. Fingerprint comparisons and the beginnings of DNA testing started in the mid-1980s, but it was nowhere near what would develop in the coming decades. So they were very limited at this time in terms of getting DNA. And without names, there was no missing persons reports to match them to, so there was no leads to follow. So the victims were nameless and the killer was obviously nowhere to be found. And the case would soon grew completely cold, and it would be a haunting mystery that lingered in the back of detectives' minds. This discovery would remain an open wound for 15 years to come. The bodies would be buried in St. John Baptist Cemetery with a donated headstone reading, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of women age 22 to 33 and girl child age 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10th, 1985 in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care." It's so heartbreaking. But it's okay. We're gonna get to the bottom of it. So years and years would go on and this case would remain cold. But in 2000, something else would happen. So in May 2000, Detective John Cody, a seasoned officer with the New Hampshire State Police, found himself drawn back to Bear Brook State Park. Cody had joined the force years after the first barrel was discovered, and the case had always troubled him after the case went cold. Something about it felt extremely unfinished, and he couldn't really shake that feeling that there was something more to find. After all, who murders 2 people and leaves them in a barrel in the middle of the state park? A piece of shit, that's who. So on that spring day, Cody returned to the park, retracing the steps of the original investigation. And the park was just as dense and foreboding as it was 15 years prior. And as he was walking through the park, he kind of moved through the underbrush and he spotted something. A second barrel, eerily similar to the first, hidden in the same isolated area as the first one. So Cody's breath would catch in his throat as he approached the second barrel, his instincts telling him this is what he had been looking for. And with a sense of dread, he would walk up to the barrel and he would find exactly what he feared. 2 more sets of remains, both young girls and both in similar state of decomposition as the first victims. And Cody would know pretty much instantly that these murders were connected. So the same person had done this, so now there were 4 victims and not 2, making it a serial killing. And the discovery of finding the second barrel obviously reignited the investigation, finding this killer, but obviously the sense of frustration remained, because they didn't know who these girls were either, because they weren't found with any items either, and they were in the same decomposition, so they were basically just skeletal remains. Although it was 2000, so technology had improved some. So Cody and his colleagues worked tirelessly, re-examining old leads, interviewing potential witnesses, and cross-referencing missing persons reports from across the country. But nothing matched. And with frustrations climbing due to no answers being found, perhaps the most frustrating thing is that the second barrel, which was so close to the first one, wasn't found in the 1985 investigation, which is just like, walk 10 feet that way, there's a whole barrel over there. Like, it didn't really make, I don't know, it just didn't really make any sense to me. We're not done with this obviously yet, but it's just like, how the fuck do you f that up? And like I said, quite literally, this was very close to Bear Brook Gardens, a mobile home park, and judging between the length of the trailers, the distance between the barrels was literally 5 to 6 trailers long, which is about 400 to 500 feet by estimates, which isn't that much, okay? I grew up in a trailer. Not in a trailer, but like, we went camping in a trailer, and I don't know how long that shit, it's not long, okay? Takes about 10 seconds to walk the length of a trailer. Not 10 seconds, 5 seconds maybe, I don't know. Either way, I'm just frustrated. So as the investigation stagnated, a shadowy figure moved in and out of law enforcement's periphery. A man who went by many names, but none of them his own. Terry Petter Rasmussen, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but honestly, don't really give a shit because he is the piece of shit we're talking about today, was born 1943 in Denver, Colorado. And by the 1970s, he had become a drifter, using a string of aliases to avoid detection, such as Bob Evans, Curtis Mayo Kimball, Gordon Jensen, and Larry Vanner. What the, if you can make up your own names, why are you coming up with these lame ass, I guess, I don't know, maybe that's the point, is that they're not very memorable, but they're stupid. Like you. Not you. I'm talking about Rasmussen, or whatever the f his name is. But alas, he was a chameleon, able to slip through the cracks of society, leaving devastation in his wake. And in the late 1970s, Rasmussen began a relationship with Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch. I love the name Honeychurch, that's so cute. A young mother from California. And Marlise had 2 daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWatters. And in November 1978, Marlise and her daughters vanished without a trace after spending Thanksgiving with her family. And unbeknownst to them, this would be the last time they ever saw her alive. Rasmussen had taken Marlise and her daughters to New Hampshire, and no one knows precisely what happened during this time, but what was very clear was that Rasmussen murdered all 3 of them, stuffing their bodies into barrels and leaving them in the woods in Bear Brook State Park. But Rasmussen wouldn't stop there. That just wasn't enough for this garbage piece of shit. He would move on, drifting across the country, leaving a trail of absolute destruction. And by 1981, he was living in Manchester, New Hampshire, where he started dating another woman, Denise Bowden, who also had a young daughter named Dawn. And shortly after Thanksgiving that year, Denise disappeared. This guy's got a weird thing for Thanksgiving. I don't know. But Rasmussen would keep her daughter, raising her under yet another alias, which was Gordon Jensen. And in 1986, Rasmussen abandoned Dawn at a trailer park. But this guy's just the biggest piece of shit. In California, telling the neighbors that he couldn't care for her anymore. Though he was later arrested for child abandonment in 1989. But he would get on parole in 1990, less than a year later, and he would be on the run again changing his name and alias. And by 2022, Rasmussen had found another woman, Yoon Soon Jun. And I'm sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. I think I am. I've said it a few times, and if I'm saying that wrong, I'm really, really sorry. And Yoon Soon would go missing later that year. And he would be arrested for the murder of Yoon Soon Jun in 2003 after her body was found dismembered and buried in their home in Richmond, California. And this is the first time that one of his heinous crimes would actually be connected to him. Rasmussen, now known as Larry Vanner, was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison in 2003. And he would never confess to any other crimes and took many of his dark secrets to his stupid grave when he died of natural causes in prison in 2010. Which brings us to 2010's DNA breakthrough. So for decades, the Bear Brook murders remained unsolved, the victims unidentified, and it wasn't until the 2010s that forensic genealogy began to emerge as a powerful new tool in criminal investigations that the case finally started to crack. So authorities would obviously revisit the Bear Brook case using DNA technology to try and identify the victims. And the results were shocking to say the least. The DNA testing would link the women and 2 girls to be Marlise Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, Marie, who was 8 years old, and Sarah, who was 11 months old. And in 2016, they were also able to identify a family member for the 4th body, the middle child. And Terry Rasmussen is actually this little girl's biological father. So her biological father murdered her and then stuck her in a barrel. I just can't, I just don't understand how people are this evil. I don't know. But investigators now had a name, and with it, it's horrific history began to emerge. 2016, in addition to being the year that the middle child was identified as Terry's daughter, strangely was also the year that the police revealed that Rasmussen's former girlfriend, Denise Bowden, is considered missing. A staggering 35 years later after she was last seen. What?